There are people who leave, and then there are people who stay long enough to shape your life without ever truly showing up in it. That is a different kind of loss. And for many people, that is the father wound. A man who was absent through distance, absent through disinterest, absent through inconsistency, or present in the body, but unreachable in every place that mattered. This is the Detachment Lab, and this is Disappearing Acts, the loss of a father. When people talk about father loss, they often imagine one story. He left, he disappeared, he wasn't around. But father loss can happen in more than one way. Sometimes a father is gone physically. Other times, he is right there in the house, but emotionally absent. He is working, sleeping, irritable, detached, avoidant, uninterested in the emotional world of the child. And the children feel that, even when they do not yet have language for it. Because a father's presence in a child's life is not only about being visible, it's about being available. Recognition, protection, interest, engagement. The child is not only asking, is he here? The child is asking something deeper. Do I register to him? Do I matter enough to be seen? Am I important enough to be protected? And when that answer keeps coming back unclear, something happens inside the child's mind. They begin trying to interpret the silence. Children are meaning makers. They do not experience absence neutrally. They explain it to themselves, and because children are naturally egocentric in development, they rarely conclude, my father has emotional limitations. Instead, they conclude something far more personal. I must not be important enough. I must not be impressive enough. I must not be lovable enough. That is how father absence becomes identity level pain, because a child does not simply lose access to a parent. The child begins forming private conclusions about their worth. And those conclusions often go underground. They do not always sound like sadness. Sometimes they sound like this: I'll do it myself. I don't need anybody. I'll prove myself. I'll never let anyone see that I need that. That is why father wounds often create adults who appear strong, self-sufficient, highly capable, while quietly carrying a deep ache around being chosen, being seen, or being enough without performance. A father does not determine a child's value, but the father role often shapes how that value is mirrored back. For many people, the father role influences how safe it feels to take up space, how natural it feels to be protected, how worthy it feels to be chosen, how comfortable it feels to be guided, how much permission should someone feel to trust themselves in the world. When that role is absent, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable, the child often compensates in one of two directions. One direction is pursuit. They become performers. They achieve, they excel, they become hyper capable. They become the kind of person who learns to earn applause because they were never taught how to receive presents freely. The other direction is withdrawal. They stop expecting recognition at all. They shrink their needs, lower their expectations, become self-contained far too early. Both patterns come from the same wound, a child trying to solve the emotional math of a father who did not consistently show up in the role. Father absence is not always quiet. Sometimes it is aggressive. Sometimes the father is not simply unavailable. Sometimes he is harsh, critical, verbally abusive, intimidating, explosive, emotionally cold, in ways that make the child feel deeply unsafe. Now the wound becomes layered. The child is not only missing guidance, the child is learning fear from the same figure associated with protection. That creates a profound kind of confusion because the father role is supposed to organize safety, but in homes like that, the protector becomes the threat. And when that happens, protection itself becomes distorted. The child may grow up associating masculinity with unpredictability, authority with intimidation, attention with criticism, being noticed with being corrected, judged, or emotionally overpowered. And later in life, they may find themselves drawn to relationships, bosses, friendships, power dynamics that recreate the same emotional architecture. Not because it feels good, simply because it feels familiar. When a father is absent, emotionally unavailable, or harmful, the nervous system learns a lesson. Sometimes that lesson becomes, do not expect protection. Sometimes it becomes, do not ask for help. Sometimes it becomes, if you want recognition, perform. Sometimes it becomes, if you want safety, stay small. Over time, those lessons become embodied. You become the person who overachieves but never feels accomplished. The person who attracts emotionally unavailable partners because deep down that still feels familiar. The person who struggles to receive care because care once arrived inconsistently or conditionally or not at all. That is why the father wound often appears later, not only as grief, but as pattern repetition in who you choose and what you tolerate and how hard you work for recognition that should not require suffering. One of the deepest effects of father absence is the chase it can create. Not always for the father himself, but for the emotional experience his presence should have left behind. Recognition to be chosen without performance, to be valued without overextending, to be affirmed without bleeding for it first, to feel protected without proving you deserve protection. But when that blueprint fractures early, the adult may not recognize the grief beneath it. Instead, they ask, why do I work so hard for people who give so little back? Why do I keep choosing relationships where consistency must be earned? Why does rejection feel so much bigger than the present situation? Because often the adult is not only responding to the moment in front of them, they are responding to a much older silence. Eventually, this wound reveals itself as grief. Not just anger, not just resentment, grief. Grief for the father you did not have, the father who should have noticed, the father who should have protected, the father who should have guided, the father who should have made it easier to trust your value instead of leaving you to discover it alone. Many people bury this grief under competence. They become impressive, independent, unstoppable, but beneath that strength, there is often one question, one quiet question. Why wasn't I enough to stay for? Why wasn't I important enough to be seen? That is the part that deserves tenderness. Detachment from the father wound does not begin by pretending it didn't matter. It begins with telling the truth about what it shaped. Detachment says, I will no longer measure my value through someone else's inability to show up. I will no longer perform for recognition that should have been given freely. I will no longer confuse pursuit with love or absence with proof that I was not enough. This kind of detachment requires grief because it means letting go of the fantasy that one day he will say the thing, do the thing, become the version of the father you needed when it mattered most. Detachment begins when your life stops orbiting around delayed hope. Detachment from a father wound is rarely dramatic. It usually begins quietly. First, you stop interpreting his absence as a measurement of your worth. His silence was not proof you were unworthy. His distance was not proof you were forgettable. His inconsistency was not proof you were not enough. It was evidence of his capacity, not your value. Second, you stop chasing recognition through suffering. You stop overperforming for breadcrumbs. You stop choosing environments where basic visibility must be earned. Third, you rebuild protection from the inside out, through boundaries, through healthier relationships, through people who do not require auditions for basic care. This is where detachment begins, not by becoming cold, but by becoming unavailable to the old equation that said absence meant deficiency. The loss of a father can leave behind many things: anger, confusion, abandonment, overachievement, a complicated relationship with masculinity, authority, being chosen, but underneath it all, there is one quiet truth waiting to be reclaimed. You were always worthy of being seen. The absence did not create worthlessness. It created distortion. And detachment is a slow process of refusing to let that distortion narrate the rest of your life. At some point, the child stops asking, why wasn't I enough? And the adult starts asking a better question. Why did I learn to measure myself through someone else's incapacity? That is the turn. That is where detachment begins. Not when the past stops hurting, not when the wound magically disappears, but when the story changes. When you stop calling his absence a reflection of your worth and start seeing it for what it actually was: a limitation, a fracture, a failure in capacity, but not a verdict on you. And once the truth lands, you do not have to keep performing for a witness who never learned how to see. You do not have to keep bleeding for recognition that should have been given freely. You do not have to keep turning his absence into your explanation. This is the Detachment Lab. Keep your heart. Let the rest go.